Welcome to Things Go Sideways, a podcast featuring honest conversations about what happens when your world gets shaken up in a way that makes it impossible to continue on the same path you were on, and the only way forward means you have to change. Today, I'm talking with Katherine Tuominen. She is a marketing strategist, a brand storyteller, a founder of Catalyst Brand Strategy. She has built her work across 2 continents, navigating the gap between what the digital nomad life looks like from the outside and what it actually costs on the inside. We're talking about visa battles. We're talking about reverse culture shock. We're talking about an erosion of a story that's often told about what freedom is supposed to feel like, and then what's really the truth of it underneath all of that. And so while she's been going through this, she's also been building businesses. One of them had been dedicated to calling out the normalization of toxic workplace culture. This is a woman who has done so much. Katherine, thank you for being here and for being willing to talk about what happens when the life you design starts designing you.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me, KiKi. It's an absolute pleasure.
Yes. So, we talked just a little bit beforehand, but not enough for me to actually understand all that goes into what it is to be a digital nomad and to understand this sort of experience that I think a lot of people see the Instagram version and think is very exciting and adventurous and exotic. But from what I understand is maybe not always all of those things, or at least not all at the same time.
Yes.
So
Well, you described
okay, I was just going to
absolutely.
say, can you talk to me a little bit about that? What is the experience like? And let's just talk about it. What is, in your mind, a definition for being a digital nomad?
That's a great question. Yes. So digital nomads often identify as someone who travels frequently and they sort of like hop from one location to the next, and they're really more focused on experiencing the world as a whole, and they're not necessarily bound to a particular location. So this can be for as short as a couple of weeks at a time, or it can be for months on end, depending on how they prefer to structure their time. But most of the time, I've noticed that this comes from a deep calling to explore the world or see what else is out there and live life a bit more differently. And that can either be, something that was traditionally something you aspire towards as a young age, or it can be something that occurred after one of these pivotal change moments that happened to many of us. So in my case, it was very much during COVID. I was in Australia during this period. And for those of you who don't know, Melbourne had the toughest, most restricted laws in place that we couldn't even walk out of our house without showing like a grocery receipt that we were on our way back from the supermarket. It was crazy.
Wow.
There was police patrolling the streets. It was absolute insanity and very hard on everyone's mental health. And that really made me realize travel is a non-negotiable for me. I never want to be in a situation where I feel trapped to a particular environment again. And so the moment that was lifted, I was like, okay, I need to make some changes in my life so I can live this digital nomad lifestyle, which gives me that flexibility and freedom to travel as needed.
And so what went into that? I mean, that's a pretty big jump. And I imagine that people would think, but what about your family? And what about the business that you've built up to that point? What went into actually making that jump so that it became feasible for you?
Absolutely. So I was really fortunate to already have a US client base. And actually, being in Australia, it was a disservice because the time zone was so brutal. I was barely sleeping and holding on as it is. So I needed to be somewhere that was a bit more neutral and could access different regions and time zones in a way that was reasonable. So I knew that that was part of the plan from the get go. But a big piece of all of this is, of course, connecting and having those relationships. So I did have to have an honest chat with my friends and family to say, look, I love you all, but if I continue to live the way I have, I just know that I will be disappointed at the end of my life where I feel like I haven't fully lived to my full potential. And so that really pushed me to kind of go against the grain, even though everyone said now's not a good time to travel. It's a very, the geopolitical context is very tense. Be careful. And it came with a lot of backlash and including some friendships and connections lost.
Really? Really? So was it people who were just pushing back saying, you don't know what you're doing, it's too dangerous, or just they just didn't understand how you could make that decision? Where did that come from? Where did that fissure come from?
Absolutely. I think it's a mix of things. So many of us have grown up in an environment where we're taught the 9 to 5 is the safest route, get a job, buy the house, have the family, and call it a day. And so digital nomads in many ways represent this other way of living that is not necessarily locked to a particular location or following a path that we have been fed for so long. And so what I've noticed most of the time when I was having those conversations is most of the time it was either their own projections or their own misunderstandings. It wasn't necessarily an accurate representation of what was possible. And so I really leaned on this as a reference point to kind of trust myself and know there must be a way to do this because other people are doing it too. And even if that's a minority or it's less common, it doesn't mean it's not possible. So I really had to kind of ignore some of the voices or external noise and just go inwards and trust that next step.
Well, so let's talk about the next step, because I have to say that when you're looking at the Instagram version of a person's existence as a digital nomad, there are a lot of like beautiful photos and just this idea of, yes, perhaps I'm sitting in Paris and I'm sort of, observing people throughout the day. Maybe I'm working on my memoirs on this side, and then I'm getting work done on the other side. And this sort of endless parade of ideas that are romantic and
Mhm.
exotic. And you got to tell me, like, is that the truth, or is there actually something else that's going on? Because I don't think you'd be talking to me on Things Go Sideways if it were just that beautiful and perfect.
Right. Yes, you nailed it. I think it's definitely not as picture perfect as it seems. To give one common example, if we were actually to bring our laptop out on the beach, we wouldn't even be able to see the screen because the sun is just beaming so strongly on it and you're getting sand on the keyboards. It's just not practical. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions that people have is suddenly have more free time. So they're like, oh, you must be taking long walks by the beach or, as you said, writing your memoir and just soaking it up. But the reality is the work hasn't changed. I'm still working the same amount of hours, just in a different location. So what that often means is in finding ways to, much like anyone, enjoy the weekends or enjoy evenings and carve out these small moments in between the working day. So I'm still very much functioning and performing as I always have, regardless of the location, but managing those expectations along the way.
It's so interesting because I feel like, once you've gotten over that sort of threshold, that hurdle of making the decision, making this grand leap to then become a digital nomad, then there's the reality of it. And you don't want to be wrong. You don't want to admit at some point that things are not as rosy as you thought that they would be.
Right.
So what was it like maybe the first time you hit across, some sort of barrier or some sort of hurdle where you're like, ooh, this is really an ugly experience right now. Did I do the right thing? Like, what is this?
Yes. Well, one of the biggest things is we often don't realize that sometimes we may be living our life with someone else's expectations, or we may have the idea that we have a clean start when we live somewhere new. And the reality is, we're probably still the same person to some degree. And that kind of baggage, the history, the traumas, they come with you, even if you travel, even if you're in a beautiful destination. So if you haven't done that inner work or surrounded yourself with a supportive network to kind of help work through these issues, they will come back inevitably in some way, even if it's in a different situation or a different scenario. So that was one of the biggest aha moments I had where I realized just because I'm I'm in a new location doesn't mean I myself have healed through or I'm in a new chapter, so to speak. So that involved a lot of deep inner work and obviously therapy and different modalities to truly kind of unpack how can I truly step into a new lifestyle that is aligned with me and not just sort of what I've been told or the way people perceive it to be.
Now, okay, how long have you been at the digital nomad lifestyle? Because it's not like we're talking about it in past tense, like you just gave up on the concept. So you faced the hurdles, you realized you went through the disillusionment phase and you still proceeded on. Why? Like what went into that? And what does it look like today?
Yes, I appreciate that. So, like everything, nothing's perfect. And even today, we're still figuring things out. One of the biggest considerations that digital nomads have to ask themselves is whether how frequently they want to travel and what travel actually feels aligned to them. So, obviously, there's so many different cultures, countries, situations. I talked about reverse culture shock, which is where essentially you return home and you realize that you don't quite understand the culture you grew up with anymore because you've had a different perspective on life. And so there's a lot of nuance that comes with exploring this kind of way of living. But the biggest thing to kind of sit with is what does a healthy amount of travel look like for you? So there are some people who want to be in living in a suitcase and traveling month to month to different locations, and that gives them the thrill, the life that they want, and it suits their overall vision. For myself, I realized it was way too much. I was exhausted. You know, you miss the creature comforts like holding on to your favorite mug, or just even day-to-day things like where is this light switch in the building, because you've switched so many times you don't even know how to kind of operate simple day-to-day habits. So it made routines quite challenging. So long story short, for me, I realized that I prefer longer, slower travel where I have a base and I can hop from that base to relevant places at least once a quarter, and then do local travel in between on like long weekends. So that was my sweet spot, and it was quite different from other digital nomad communities that I'd met along the way. And of course, it's very different to how many of my friends and family live back home. But it was so nice to kind of find a balance that worked for me, even if it took a bit of trial and error. And certainly, like everything, there is certain boring logistics, visas, applications, paperwork, language barriers, you name it. So we faced all of that as well.
For someone who's listening to this and thinking, I've been curious about this kind of experience, and I would like to do something like that. What are maybe the things that you learned that are more important to pay attention to that are maybe different from what most people start out paying attention to in the beginning?
That's a really great question. So, the biggest thing I learned was to consider the culture of the place.
Mm.
So, people talk about culture a lot, but that really comes down to the people and how they tend to interact. So, you might notice some places have more of a warm, friendly, welcoming approach. Some places might be a bit more reserved, but highly efficient. And so, you really need to look at what are your core values. There's a really great exercise by Brene Brown where it's like on her, I think, Bold Brave book or something like that, where she gets you to list out, the 10 core values that you have and then break that down into three and then the number one. And so they could be things like freedom, stability, you name it. And when you found these three values, that's where you can assess, okay, well, what countries actually align with these values based on how they typically operate on a day-to-day basis and based on how the people seem to approach life itself. So for me personally, I found that I prefer warmer places, warmer people, even if it's sometimes oversharing or a little bit, a little bit forthcoming. I just really prefer that. And I think that often kind of helped me decide which countries I preferred and what direction to sort of head in. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things that's not talked about enough. You need to actually stay in a place long enough to experience, well, who are these people? What do they do on
Yeah.
a day-to-day basis? What's their, normal routines? What are they talking about in the news? And that doesn't happen if you're kind of taking a box of traditional touristy things to do and you're not really getting to know the culture on a deeper level.
So I wanted to ask you a question about how you have taken these experiences of travel and understanding other cultures and other perspectives, and even other ways of thinking about your work and the way that it's perceived by others, and how you've applied that to the work that you do with your clients. Because you are a speaker, you are a trainer, you're out there and you're working with people about how their brand is perceived, right? So, like,
Mm.
how have you taken these experiences and then applied them to the work that you do with your clients?
Absolutely. So, the biggest takeaway in terms of taking the experience and applying it to our client work is understanding cultural nuance. So, a
Mhm.
lot of clients we work with are from a variety of different backgrounds, and they do represent we specialize in the health and wellness industry. So, they do represent different spectrums on that. Some are a lot more holistic and wellness or alternative, and others fall more into the scientific clinical area. And we love to find that sweet spot in the middle where it's still grounded in the science and the facts and the case studies, while also treating the human as a whole human being, and not necessarily prescribing or diagnosing without recognizing that full person story. So, to go back to your question, the biggest thing I've learned with all this is often when we're talking about someone's unique value proposition, or, why should I get hired for the job? And these questions we often get asked from a personal branding or a professional branding standpoint. It comes down to being able to encompass, well, what really makes you unique? And often that's not what's written on paper necessarily. It's not what's on your CV or resume. It's often in these sort of softer life moments that have shaped you, including these pivotal changes. And so when we look at that person's background, their culture, their history, and how that's all influenced the way they see the world today, that becomes part of their brand story. And we want to start from that place to really encompass who they are beyond just a CV narrative.
I love it. I mean, I'm really fascinated because I think that to do the work that you do, you have to have a curiosity in order to do it well. You have to have a curiosity about understanding your clients and what they do better. And then obviously, you have this built in curiosity for travel and for experiencing and understanding other people. I'm going to go back and dig a little bit more into what makes you you and
Yes.
just say, was that always there? Was that something, were you known for being a curious person? Did you know inherently that you wanted to travel a lot even before COVID hit? Like, was that built into who Catherine was when you were a child?
Honestly, yes. I think it's in my last name. I was born in Finland. We left when I was just a year old, and then I grew up in China. And then I moved to Australia when I was 8, and then I grew up in Australia for the rest of the time. But we did a lot of family travel in between. So, it's kind of called a third culture kid, or expat living, and the like. So I think I had very much was raised with an international lens in mind. And it was only a matter of time before I kind of returned to that in my adult capacity. So I do think it was innate for me, but that, everyone's journey is different. And that doesn't mean it has to be something you were born into. I think hopefully this is just an example of what's possible, and more people can sort of figure out if that aligns with them too.
Do you find yourself giving advice to other, I know you work with a lot of founders, or, you have along the way. Do you find them asking you a lot of questions to find out if this is a sort of way of running their lives, their business that would work for them?
Absolutely. Yes, I'm always super transparent about, the pros, the cons, the reality of what goes behind it all.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest realization is you don't actually need a lot of stuff. So we get so used to, accumulating things and acquiring objects. And going back to our earlier conversation, even titles that we become associated with in a corporate life. And when you're in a foreign country, no one knows your title. It's probably different anyway if they translated it. So you really get to kind of reassess who you are at your core beyond these, I guess, metrics or surface level meanings that someone else may place on you, which allows you to kind of get to know yourself in a very different way and shape something new. So my advice is always, it doesn't have to be all in one. You don't have to leave everything behind and suddenly drop it all to do this digital nomad lifestyle, but you can start in a bite-sized way of, why not try a couple weeks, a month. There's a lot of groups currently that allow these almost contained communities where, if you're worried about safety, or especially as a woman, how to even begin this process, they walk you through that and really kind of set you up in a home, and with the activities and different ways of experiencing that culture almost in a safe network.
Oh, wow.
So that would be another way to kind of almost dip your toe in for a month or so and see if that's a way you'd like to move forward in the future.
Oh, interesting. I didn't even know that these things existed. I guess I shouldn't be surprised because there is a lot of interest in this, and certainly with technology, we have the ability to make this happen. But yeah, I didn't even realize that there would be all of these different structures in place out there that could make it a little bit more feasible for people who, might be out there thinking, this is a dangerous thing. It's very risky. I don't know if I can do it. So it's
Absolutely. There's so many options. Other examples include volunteering, and also, whether that be not-for-profits or local organizations or otherwise. And then there's also internships. And, you mentioned writing a memoir, but that could be an artist in residency. I feel like that's another great way to experience the culture and work on something you're passionate about while still relatively managing your day-to-day. So yeah, there are many more options than I think people realize.
Do you feel that when you are visiting each of these different places and sort of going back and forth into different cultures, and I love this idea, this concept of being able to sort of have a home base, but then, venturing out for these
Mhm.
explorations and adventures, do you feel that you learn something new about yourself and your identity each time you do it? Or is it something where it's just become sort of routine? I can't imagine that it would be. I imagine that there's always something new.
Yes, there is always something new. I think you learn a lot of soft skills like being able to pivot easily and being able to almost like work with broken English or different communication methods to still form that commonality of what you and someone totally different might share. And so, those soft skills are great when you kind of go back home and enter, a room full of strangers. Suddenly, it's not as intimidating to strike up a conversation or to ask them about a trip they went on, and you might have these elements to draw on. So I think going back to your question around whether you're kind of rediscovering yourself, that's definitely an ongoing case. But I would argue with or without travel, you're still given that opportunity. It's more like travel fast tracks it or puts it front of mind because you get to determine, should I say hi to this person? Should I just go back to my hotel or Airbnb? How do I want to show up in this new environment? And so you're much more conscious maybe of your day to day because your typical routines have been shaken up.
Interesting. Yeah, I know that there's this saying, this, wherever you go, there you are. Like you can't ever
Yes.
leave. You're not really leaving any of your trouble, your traumas, or anything behind you. You'll be taking those with you too. I think it's really fascinating that because of this regular exposure to understanding new things about your identity and even the traditional ways that people look, whether it's through roles and titles or their position in their community or, and like where they live, you sort of, each time you're venturing out and each time you're exploring through each move, you're taking those pieces away, which is sort of stripping down to who am I really inside. So what would you say? I know
Mhm.
this is getting a little deep, but what would you say about what you've discovered about yourself, beyond the titles, beyond the roles, beyond owning an agency and all of the things like that that you would say
Mhm.
you understand about who you are? What have you
Yes.
learned about your identity truly, who you
It's
are?
so funny you bring this up because the thing I've learned is it's actually been there all along. So when you think about what you were like as a kid or what you were like as like even like a young teenager, a lot of those, I guess, little hints or signs are there. So I loved storytelling. I would spend all my time writing and, sharing plays that I wrote or like writing elaborate stories. Or when I was playing Barbies with my sister, we would make the most, enchanting, well-crafted, drawn-out plot lines that would go on for like weeks on end. And these are all the signs that still stayed with me, but I just wasn't consciously aware of it when I was in these, especially more corporate roles where you're almost told to leave your personal life behind or your, I guess, like curiosities to some degree and just focus on what's really going to help the business more directly. And so you sort of hide away some of that, your full persona, and narrow in more on the persona that's going to be best performing, quote unquote, in that environment. But the best thing about travel is you're no longer necessarily forced to be best performing in this environment. You can choose how you show up in a much more creative and flexible way. So I found myself just naturally, kind of doing mindfully coloring in and drawing and signing up for activities that I would have been too nervous to do, like dance classes, and almost like exploring the things I used to love as a kid without having these social expectations or barriers because no one knew, right? Like there was no one
Yeah.
watching. I didn't have to tell anyone. It was very much like a chance to kind of play and be in touch with those elements that I have always identified with, but just forgot.
Wow. I think that this has to hopefully, I guess, inspire, and if not inspire, then at least alleviate the pain and fear of people who are so afraid of change that sometimes we can get comfortable in what we know that's around us, that sometimes change or times of uncertainty can provide a lot of real fear. But what I'm hearing in what you're sharing about your own experience is that there's so much room for growth. There's so many things you can try when you do take away these more traditional, I don't want to say like tethers to identity, and
Mhm.
say, you
Yes.
know what? Why not try a dance class I've never done
Mhm.
before? I could be the person that draws on my lunch break. That could be me.
Yes.
You change that. A friend of mine once told me that the only difference between being a runner and not a runner is running. You just decide that you're going to run. You don't have to be good at it, just run, right?
Just
And
decide. Yes.
so I kind of love this idea of opening yourself to the creativity that is allowed through change, and maybe through those uncertain times that sort of shake things up.
Absolutely. And maybe on that as well, I think, because you touched on fear and I guess, the bravery that it takes to make a change like this. But like you also said, often the change is there to some degree. We've been through some kind of shakeup, and that's the moment to say, well, hang on a second, what if my life looked different and what are the options? And so I guess in terms of the fears that some people may have around digital nomad life or even just travel in general, the biggest thing is we're all human, and it's so funny the amount of times I've been in a situation and neither person speaks the language, but you're gesturing and you're kind of like pointing and figuring it out, and there's just so much, I guess, like warmth and love to be shared when you're open to it and trying something different. So as much as possible, try not to let fear be the guide because it doesn't have to be.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And even that idea that you're stripping away the communication and traditional, you don't even have to have the same language. The idea that you can have a really great sort of communication exchange without even speaking the same language with somebody else. I mean, that has to be fun too, solving that problem, right? And realizing that you
Yes.
can. So I guess if there's somebody who's out there that's listening to this and they're saying, look, I wish I could be you. I don't feel as brave. I have not had these experiences. I'm going through a sideways moment right now in my own life. What feels honest to say to them right now?
Ooh, I would say that you can take a moment to assess why this idea has popped up in your mind in the first place. So, is it that you like more of the imagery you see on Instagram, or is it this kind of pull for something more, but you don't know what that more may be, and sort of go inwards and figure out where you might be leaning towards? And then from there, I would say to break it down in a way that it doesn't seem anywhere near as big and intimidating. So, it could be that you do a trip to a different state that you've never been to before, or it could be that you have, your long-term best friend or even a partner that you trust, and you say, hey, look, we always go to this place for our anniversary. What if we just branched like a little bit further and tried that instead? So almost break it down to be a bit more bite-sized so you can give it a try and then see what's possible from there.
Okay. I love it. So catalystbrandstrategy.com is where people can go to find out more. And I did check out your Instagram and found more information there. Can people reach out to you through LinkedIn? How do you prefer that people reach out to you?
Either one. I'm more active on LinkedIn, so that's the easiest place for quick responses. But yes, happy to connect on any of the platforms.
All right. And then I wanted to ask you one more question because I can't help myself and I'm super curious, but it's like of all of the things in this sort of digital nomad lifestyle and exploring, what are the things that you look back and you think, oh, I should have never wasted my time doing this, or like spending so many hours investigating that? Is there anything where you're like,
Mhm.
yeah, I like probably didn't need to go that deep into whatever topic and preparing myself for this life?
Yes, it's actually a bit of a segue, but the biggest thing I learned was that a lot of the battles you think are super important suddenly seem less so when you're traveling. And that's not to say it's not actually important and it wasn't a pivotal moment in your life, but you get this perspective that allows you to see, would I care about this on my deathbed? Probably not. Did I need to spend that much time, battling, tearing myself apart, wishing I said something else? All the things that we tend to do when we're sort of in these spirals. I think travel has this beautiful ability to kind of let you zoom out and see the bigger picture and the world as is, and almost put into context what you truly value most. So you're not spending as much time worrying about the little things or the things that you can't control, and instead just appreciating the moment in front of you to the best of your ability.
Has it changed what your dreams are for the future? Are you now, I imagine without so much fear and without so many, things that are sort of tethering you to one identity or another. Um, what does the future look like for you? What are you dreaming about right now? What is your vision for what happens next?
Well, funnily enough that you mentioned that, I think it's less about me as a person in the sense of identity shedding, finding out who I am at my core, and all of the kind of journey that comes with travel and this phase of pivotal changes. And instead, it's more about impact and what I can do from the wider community now that I've seen so many different places and spoken to so many people from different cultures. And so I don't have a solid answer for this yet. I'm also in that in between point from that standpoint, but I do think that it would involve really greater impact from changing multiple millions of lives and offering something that is truly going to make our world a better place in some capacity. And we're already doing that with the clients that we work with who are very much in the health and wellness space and helping people. But I'd love to see what this looks like for me too as an individual, and ways that I can give back more meaningfully. So that's definitely the next phase.
I love it. This is so fantastic. This just, I honestly, I think I could talk to you all day long. Like, this is really, I keep thinking of additional things to ask, but I want to thank you for your time today. I want to thank you for bringing the honesty, for bringing the truth. Yes, you can have those beautiful moments where you're writing your memoir, but you might also have these moments where you're struggling with Wi-Fi and figuring out how to operate the lights someplace,
Right.
like, I mean, all of these things are possibilities. You shared with us that gap between the life you design and the life you actually live, and that there's value in all of it. And I just
Mhm.
really love that. That's fantastic.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure, and I equally appreciate all the homework you did and the insightful questions. Hopefully, the audience also gets a lot of value from this.
Yes, I hope so. Look, everyone, you heard it from Katherine. I hope you will check out her catalystbrandstrategy.com, that you will check out her LinkedIn profile. Her Instagram, we'll link to that in the show notes as well. It's worth your time to get to know a little bit more about our great guest today, and also to remember that you don't have to resolve everything today. You just have to stop pretending. You just have to face things honestly. That's enough for now. I want you to remember that when things go sideways, that is where the real story begins. Right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Katherine.
Thank you.
Yes.